Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for FMT's presentation of SAP ByDesign, Tender Loving Care. My name is Lucas Darling, and I'm an account executive here at FMT Consultants. I'm joined here by one of our very own SAP ByDesign practice managers, Ken Erb. For those of you who aren't familiar with FMT, I'd like to just take a few moments to give you a brief introduction of our company. Here at FMT, we opened up for business in 1995 and have successfully completed over 1,500 projects and have accumulated over 350 clients spanning the U.S. and into Canada. During this time, we have been able to establish ourselves as Southern California's leading provider of integrated solutions, and along with our 21 years of experience, we have grown to well over 80 team members located both in Carlsbad as well as Los Angeles. At FMT, we pride ourselves on our 5 core values, which we like to hold ourselves to every day. Those values are integrity, service excellence, collaboration, innovation, and passion. The FMT way is really something you begin to understand once you engage and begin to do work with us. With the combination of talent, experience, and methodology, we are fully dedicated to the success of your company. We offer a wide array of services pertaining to ERP, CRM, SharePoint, BI, and Office 365. We have an entire department dedicated specifically to customer support with 13 full-time senior consultants serving you from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Here at FMT Consultants, we have extremely experienced consultants who are versed in all kinds of backgrounds, industry, and systems. We even have licensed CPAs employed as consultants here at FMT. Here are just a few of the clients we get the privilege to work with on a daily basis. At this moment, I would like to just take the chance to talk about our annual Enverge event, which is coming up quick on May 25th. It is our yearly technology conference composed of webinars about the latest and greatest technology in the industry, breakout sessions revolving around the best practices, and tips and tricks across all our different products, and special keynote speakers from some of our very most satisfied clients. So remember to sign up before it gets too late. Now I'm going to hand it over to Ken, but before I do, if at any time during the presentation you have a question, feel free to type them into the comment box. We will be monitoring it during the entire presentation, and we'll answer questions at the end. Thank you. Ken?
Hello, everybody. So my name is Ken Erb. I'm the SAP ByDesign practice manager here at FMT Consultants. My job here is to oversee the team and all major implementations that we do for SAP ByDesign for our mid-market clients on the cloud. So today what we're going to talk about is kind of keeping your SAP ByDesign system a little tidy, right? So there's quarterly updates that come out from ByDesign that are seamless really to the end client, the end user. But we want to talk through kind of what the best practices are for reviewing those new updates, understanding what they are, configuring and scoping in some of the items that typically don't just automatically flow into the system, and we'll talk through all the different types of updates that the system has. And then in addition to that, we'll kind of segue into keeping your user count tidy. So what kind of user access you guys have, what user licenses different users will fall into, and how you maintain that. And then in addition to that, some insider information from the SAP side on how they manage user licenses and some tips and tricks on how to manage that going forward. So we'll get started first by jumping right into the system. So I'm going to minimize our PowerPoint here, and we'll pop into SAP ByDesign. So the first thing that we're going to look at is updates in the system. So every single time SAP comes out with an update at the end of every quarter, there's going to be this little icon that pops down in your system. So I'm in the HTML5 interface, which is one of the updates that we're going to look at first. I'm going to navigate through the HTML5 interface for the most part of this demo, but part of it I will have to jump into the old Silverlight due to some complications with business configuration. So when we get to that point, I'll let you know. So the first thing that we're going to look at is when you sign into your ByDesign system, there's this little question mark up on the top. If I click on it, you're going to see Help Center, Report an Incident, See What's New, and About SAP. So first, if we click on About SAP, it's going to tell us what version we're on. So this is important because as SAP rolls out the versioning, you're going to be able to know exactly what version your production system is on, and then also your test system. So typically the way that this happens is ByDesign, SAP will contact the IT and executive sponsors from a company, which I'll show you where that's maintained, and they're going to let you know that a update is coming out, in this instance 1702, which is the most recent update from SAP. And that 1702 update is going to happen to your test system first, and then typically 2 weeks after your production system will follow. That allows for customization and just normal SOP regression testing in that 2 weeks period time, to allow you to kind of manage any additional functionality you've added to the system and do your testing and make sure that you report incidents based on anything that seems to be crashing or error messages that you're getting. And in that period of time, it allows you to go in and see what new features are there and test them so that you can roll them out once your production system changes over to the new version. So from ByDesign standpoint, their updates are typically seamless, and what that means is that SAP lives in a world called the public solution model. So the public solution model is the terminology used by partners and SAP from a development standpoint to explain what the framework of ByDesign is. So the public solution model is basically a set, it's basically a set of rules that their database is configured by, and any changes that they make to the system are within that public solution model, do not change anything. So for example, if you made a customization in the system that is utilizing a certain field or a certain object in the system, the name of that object will never change and its location will never change, meaning that you won't have broken links in the system for customization that's happening. So that's very important, and that's what makes SAP ByDesign very valuable and very seamless as it pertains to updates. So the next step here is that's how you tell your version, and you can also see the build date in the SAP UI5 version of it. We can hit OK, and then we go back up to this menu, and we can look and see what's new. So when we click on what's new, it's going to give us this menu. So the first thing that you're going to see up here is this hotfix button. So if I click on the hotfix, this is basically an area where anything that is reported to SAP that is found to be a true error that breaks the intended functionality of the system and is mission critical will come in as a hotfix. So these hotfixes come in regularly on normal production systems, even without an update. But when an update comes out, all of the major hotfixes are documented, and this is where you can find that documentation. So you can see the release information, the upgrades, and everything that's associated with those. More importantly, we want to look at what's new. So under this area, you're going to see what's new in cross-area topics. So cross-area topics are things like, and we can actually take a look at them. So cross-area topics are something like the user interface, right? So this is going to breach all different areas of the system, all different modules. Everything will be accounted for here. So these are important because, for example, the HTML5 interface was released for productive tenants in this release for a lot of different work centers. And the way that this has worked in the past is HTML5 has been released to test systems for testing and for error reporting. And now they've finally started to roll these work centers out into production systems. 1702 was the second major release of these work centers. So the way that that works is if you're in the old Silverlight interface, you will see every work center, everything will be available to you. There is nothing that's limited. If you log into your URL with the appendage for HTML5, you'll log into the new interface, but you'll only be able to see work centers that are released to these production tenants, and this is kind of what this information is telling you right now. So for example, there's certain supply chain management work centers that are not available yet in HTML5, so even if those are assigned to your user in the system, they will not be visible to you when you're logged into the HTML5 interface right now. What that does is give them the ability to roll out these work centers into production without interfering with the system. So you can always log into the old Silverlight and see those old work centers, but for people in your company who do things like CRM or accounting functions, most of that functionality is now available. A lot of SRM, supplier relationship management work centers are available. So it's very nice to be able to roll these things out to your team, one, because the HTML5 interface is much faster, and two, it's just way more pleasant to the eye. The way that they've configured the new interface is a lot easier to use, and you'll see that throughout this presentation. Other things in here are things like application and user management. So these are more of administrator roles and things that are associated with them. So you can see here specifically that there's user license information that has been added to the system. And I'm going to walk through these different types of updates and where you're going to see them and what's really required to start utilizing this new functionality. And then in addition to that, analytics, there's more things like relative selection options. So when you're reporting, you have the ability to choose things that are like 30 days out, 180 days out. Those selections are pre-configured into ByDesign, and there's always requests for those. So in a lot of releases, we see new ones, new relative selections being added. In addition to that, you'll see this OData service, which is actually a pretty big update in ByDesign. So this one specifically is referring to the ability to pull reporting objects out of the system using web service-like functionality. So what this does is it allows you to pull information out of the system from reports directly and not just necessarily from data sources. So while that sounds a little bit technical, it's a new functionality. Well, it's actually an old functionality that they've made a lot better in these new releases that allow us to interact with other third-party systems in different ways, and being able to build or take reports from ByDesign that have data already built in them to a certain format and be able to pull it out. So those are some of the things that are in the cross topics. Those things obviously kind of span the system and are more administrator-based type of options. If you go into the menu again, you're going to see that there's financial management, CRM, human resource, supply chain management, project management, and supplier resource management. So these will almost always be here because there's almost always an update for all of these areas in the new releases. SAP has put a new lease on life on the product with this release of the HTML5 interface, and the roadmap for 2017 is very robust. So in the next year here, and which I'll go into this in a little bit more detail, that SAP is actually bolstering their team quite a bit. I'll talk more about that when we get to the user licenses in detail. But from a what's new standpoint, if I go into the financial management, which I believe I already have open right here, and you go into what's new. So what's important in here is there's a lot of different things that can happen with these new releases, right? So SAP will release new views into the system, and the definition of a view is that you have work centers on the side of the screen, like this, and you have things like business analytics, you have your marketing, and then beneath that, you have these sub-views, right? So these are what are called the views in the system if I click between them. So what's important about this is that you can see that they're adding new views, which means it's adding new functionality. And a lot of this stuff will automatically roll into the system, meaning that this work centers and these views will be available to you, but they won't necessarily show up right away. So what that means is every user has access rights. And within those access rights, you can get as granular down to the view level. So while this says the payment monitor view is now available and there is no configuration component in it within this definition, what that means is that it's available for you to assign to users. So you won't see it immediately. So this is a key component of going into the what's new area and knowing that, hey, great, there's a new payment monitor view, there's a new bank-to-bank transfer view, but you're not going to see that stuff until you actually assign it to users. So this stuff becomes very important for you to review when these new functionality comes out. In addition to that, things like tabs, so the attachments tab. In this example, is they've created a new attachments tab to different documents in the system. Bank statements, intercompany journal entry vouchers, new charge and credit for customer. So these are just adding tabs to the system, and this is where it's detailed. So these are things that will automatically show up. You don't have to go in and configure a user to see these. This is something that will automatically be in the system, has no effect on really anything other than the fact that it's now there and available. And then if you go into like liquidity management here, you could see check file printing. So this is more of a functionality based. This is now gives you the ability to generate XML outputs for outgoing checks. A lot of new functionality in this release pertaining to the financials. And then one that's more specific to, actually this one's a good one, so the check printing is a functionality that must be what would be quote-unquote scoped into the system. So this isn't something that would be available to you immediately. In the Business Configuration Work Center, which is available to every customer, is a place that's generally navigated by an administrator or a key user, someone who has the experience to configure ByDesign. But we're going to walk through a couple of those steps today to show you exactly what it is to be able to scope some of these things in. So I'm going to start walking through that now. So for this example, check file printing, it gives you all the information that you need right here. So if I take a look at this, it says to find this option, go to Business Configuration Work Center, select Project, and go to Step 4 Questions under Cash Flow Management and Payment Liquidity Management, and select Payment Monitor. So let's do that. In this instance, I am flipping back over to the Silverlight interface. And the reason I'm doing that is because there's a known issue right now in the HTML5 interface where we're getting a error message when trying to go into business configuration scoping elements. So I can't do that right now in the HTML5 interface, so I'm going back to the Silverlight. So the way you would do that is go into Business Configuration, the Work Center. There's a couple of different options. There's the Overview and the Implementation Projects. So there's a couple of different things that might happen here. So if you're going in and you're trying to scope in new functionality, chances are in your production system you don't have what's called a change project open. And if you don't, that means that you can't scope in new functionality immediately. In that case, you would come to implementation projects and there would be nothing in this list. You would have to go and create a new project and then basically walk through that project. It would be a step-by-step wizard of what we're about to see. And it gives you the ability to select scoping options and questions associated with them. Instead of walking through the wizard, I'm just going to open up a current change project. In this instance, in our demo system, the first implementation is still open, which is no different than a change project. So I can go in and I can just right away click on Project Scope, Edit Project Scope. Once I get in here, it's going to open up a wizard, which I'm going to close this one down because I already have it open. And it's going to show you, these are the beginning portions of a scoping project. You would choose the countries, so these are things that would pertain to localization in your system. And then you would hit Next. Your implementation focus. This is really implementation related. We don't have to worry about that. And then now this is where the scoping elements come into play. So this is typically what you would see during the implementation period, is where we go in and scope in all of the elements in your system. But when a new update comes out, sometimes it is necessary to go in and scope in those because the functionality can change the processes in your system. So since that's the case, they can't just roll this functionality out immediately because it might change a process that's currently in place. So in this case, we would have to come and look at the scoping element. In this instance, it was under cash flow management, and it was under payment and liquidity. Under, I think it was under payment monitor. Let me pull it open again. Payment and liquidity. Okay, so everything in here is scoped in. So we hit Next. And now this is where the questions are. So this is the same set of scoping elements, except for beneath these now sit questions that will drive the functionality of your system. So if I drop into the cash flow management, and I go into payment and liquidity management, and I look at any one of these elements, right? So if I pop open this element, you're going to see on this right side that it opens up these questions. So things like anything that new is scoped in, you'll see will not be checked off in the in-scope checkbox. So anything that's new for functionality will not be scoped in, and this is a good example here for payment methods. These are not scoped into the system, and this would certainly change functionality in the system. In this example, you're looking at integration to CompuTop or Wirecard for credit card transactions. Those are not currently scoped in this system, but these items are. So these, incoming payments, deposits for checks, all that sort of stuff. So this is where you would come in and make those changes. So this is what's called a change project in the system. So once I'm done with this, I would hit Next. Once I've selected all the items that I want, it would ask me to review. it's going to pop this status open that's going to say, hey, there's items in here that you didn't review. Do you want to keep what the system defaulted them to? In this case, I would hit yes. This is just a review page. I can change the description of this. I can change the planned start date of this implementation, and I would finish. And then once I'm done with this, this would give me the ability to scope in these new elements. Now, that's kind of what happens when you have items that need to be scoped in. So if we go back to our financial management, so that kind of shows you the business configuration element where you would go in, you would select your questions, and then you would scope those items in your change project. Now, the next type here is, let's see here, so fixed assets. This one is in business configuration, and then you would go to account types. So this one's a little bit different, right? So this one isn't a scoping element. This is more of an assignment piece. This one basically says, on fixed assets previously, you could not create a new fixed asset and sign it as an account type to a project. So you couldn't allocate the cost of a fixed asset to a project previously. Now you can. But that account type is not automatically configured in the system as an option. So what they're saying here is that you would have to go into business configuration, then account assignment types, and you would have to add the project task type. So let's go take a look at that. So we want to go to business configuration, and we want to go to account assignment types. So this one is a little bit different. And if I go to, I'll actually go to the new interface for this one. I believe that we can navigate. We'll go to business configuration. And now instead of going to implementation projects this time, we'll just go to the overview. And then when we go to the overview, we'll just search that location. So if you read through this, it basically tells you go to business configuration, then account assignment types. That's exactly what it's called. So I'll go into the system, and I'm just going to wildcard account assignment. And I'll see it right here. So I see account assignment types. If I click on this, I can see that it's in scope. And let's see, it should let me automatically change this. In this system, it won't allow me. So I actually would have to go in and into scoping and change these, I think. Yeah, I would. So in this case, it's allowing me to view them, but I can't change them here. So I would have to go into scoping and change this also. So depending on the configuration of your system, some of these items are what are called changes available immediately, and then other ones are not. So in this instance, they're not. Completely depends on the configuration of your system. In this instance, I would have to do this one also through a change project. Okay, so that's a couple of examples through the liquidity, through financial management. I also have some of the other areas open here because there is some other different things that you're going to see when looking through the changes of your system. So what we didn't see in financial management here was we didn't see this one called what's changed. So what's changed is basically, okay, well, there's functionality in the system right now, but we're maybe just adding something to it, or we're changing a functionality of how something works. So there's a couple of different items in here that are good ones that change quite a bit, as the migration template enhancements, and then also a data source enhancement. So for both of these, I want to walk through exactly what these are. So from a data migration template standpoint, this would mean that they've added usability in the template for additional fields or additional tabs to allow you to manipulate data in the system or migrate data in the system that wasn't there before. In this instance, it's phone call activities. So this wasn't available previously to be able to load this via a template into the system. So to give a little detail on migration templates, there's kind of two methods. From an end user standpoint, there are input Excel uploads that you see on the front end of the system that you download a Excel document, it has a format, you put in all of the information you want, and you upload it through Excel. The migration templates are different. The migration templates are XML documents that are loaded through an interface through business configuration. The difference is that the front-end templates are very straightforward. It's whatever number of columns they are, the data has to be accurate. It'll give you an error message if it's not, and all you can do is just upload directly, and all it's going to do is upload information into the system. Migration templates have two different versions. They have the ability to load new data, and they have the ability to go back and change existing data. And there's two different, basically two different runs that you would do to do that. You wouldn't be able to create new items and update old ones at the same time. It's basically a switch that you flip that would allow you to do either one. So with the migration template, this would be important for someone after the fact if now you want to go in and maintain phone call activities for all of your current contacts, right? Or all of your current customers. Now, it wouldn't be easy for you to go in and load all that data, definitely not manually, especially if you have a significant amount of customers. So in this instance, this one is specifically added for the ability really for you to use the migration template to do an update or what's called enhancement in the system. And so what you would have to do in this instance is you would have to go download this template from business configuration, and I'll quickly show you that. So in this, I would have to go to overview, and there's an area called prepare for data migration. If I click on that, it's going to open up another screen for me here. Sometimes you got to do it twice. It might also make more sense to do it here. You would go to prepare for data migration, and this is a good tip just for anybody if they're looking for the migration templates. This is where you would find them. So if you go into business configuration for prepare for data migration, there's an item here called download migration templates. You open this up, and there's a couple of different things in here really quickly that I'll show you from a tips and tricks standpoint. So what you can do here is you can select all items. If you click this top button, there's a little icon in the corner here. If you select all, and then you can click download to zip file, that's a little tip right there that not everybody knows about, that you can download all of the migration templates all at once. So it takes a little bit longer, but you get them all at once, and it's in a zip file, and you can use that. Otherwise, you can just go to each item and download it. So in this instance, we're looking at a change that's done to let's see, the migration template for phone calls and activities. So this would be, we would just search for that in our list and we would download it. There we go. It opens up in a new window, so it's all the way over here. Okay, so this is where we come, download the template, and there'd be new functionality associated with it. So that's a quick one just to let you know how the migration changes work. The next one down here is data source enhancement. So data source enhancement, this is also a tricky one, and this is actually one that's really tends to be one of the biggest things that people are looking for when these new things come out is requests go into SAP to say, hey, listen, there's information in the system that we can't access today that we need access to, and we don't want to have to go create brand new custom data sources to do that. So SAP is constantly adding additional data points to data sources. The only problem is they don't always add them to the corresponding reports that are associated with them. So in this case, what you're seeing is this says customer contract data source enhancement, right? And it's telling us what data sources have been updated and the information that was updated in them. The difference between a data source and a report is that the data source is basically the table or combination of tables that houses the information that go into the reports. So I'm going to quickly show you in business analytics what that looks like and what the difference is. And then not only that, but kind of show you really quickly why this is important to know, because if I'm looking at this and it tells me 2 data sources have been updated and that there's fields that have been added to them and they're fields that I need, but they're not showing up in the reports that I need to know what data source they've been added to so that I can go and add those fields to the reports associated with them. So here's the dynamic and how it works. If I go to Business Analytics, you're going to see that this is the Management Work Center for all of the reports in the system. As an administrator, you'll have global access to all reports in the system. And you're going to see your design reports and your data sources, and then also design data sources. So in this instance, it's saying, okay, well, we've added data to this data source. And the little code I'm selecting here is the SAP ByDesign backend code for this data source that will allow me to search that in this search bar. So here it is. You can see here that I have the customer contract header. Fields have been added to this. If I hit preview, it's going to open up this data source as a report, and it'll show me all the fields that are available there. So I would see the new fields for customer contract end date, renewal rule, and cancellation rules. I would see all that in the data source. The problem is in the reports that are associated with this, which I think I can also search this data source here. No, it won't let me. But if I take the name of it, it will. So here's a little trick. If you go into the data sources and I search it, I can take this name, copy it, go into my design reports, and this should pull up all the reports that have this data source. Unluckily, not. I think that worked in the past, but doesn't work now. So if I go into contract, I will see the data source that's associated with it, though. So I can see the customer contract header on this side. So in this instance, this is where I would come in and I would say, okay, well now I need to add those fields to these reports. So if it is now available in the data source behind these, I would now be able to add it to the report. It's not necessarily there yet. And this is kind of a hit or miss. They do it both ways. Sometimes they add a lot of data into these data sources and they don't add them into the reports. So you would have to come in here, review this data, review this note, and then go in and add the fields yourself. So that's why it's really important for us to be reviewing all these release updates, because you might have a problem or a gap in your solution and a new update comes out that solves it, but you don't even know about it because you didn't review this and it wasn't immediately available, so you didn't even know. So you could be sitting in your system and have a solution that's been sitting there for 2 or 3 updates and you didn't know because we didn't review this information. And we see that all the time. So it's something that's kind of why we're having this webinar, to kind of educate people on how to get in here and look at this stuff. Additional functionality here. So from a human resource standpoint, the ability to create and track leave requests on behalf. So this was something that was definitely missing from the software. The ability to do these things on behalf of others was not really there. This also does affect user license counts too. So there's certain functionality that's built into this that will drive and change what you might require from user licenses to be able to create these things on behalf of people instead of them having to do it themselves. So there is other implications here from a new functionality standpoint that will allow you to kind of manipulate where your user licenses are being allocated. And we'll start talking about that in just a minute. A couple other things we'll just cruise through to see if there's anything in here. So here's a good example. So SCM, there is no new update, but the link is there. So if I go into what's new, it'll show me that there is a link for supply chain management, but it's telling me that there actually is no new functionality in this release. And then we also have what's new for project management, project enhancements. Let's see if there's anything else in here that would be worth diving into before I change over to the user access. Let's see. Nothing crazy here. Some changes to project management, some changes to some fields, and then supplier resource management. Here's another data source. So this looks like so they created a new data source for procurement pricing, which this one was definitely missing. This actually helps out a lot of our current clients. We've already told them about that one. Additional functionality for tax tracing. And then this was also a big one too. So this workflow rules. This was actually a really big one. There's a workflow rules quick guide here that if you click open, this is going to go into detail about what this is for. So the business background, what documents are affected by this, and then also how you would create those workflow rules. This was a big component of this release. So if you're not aware of the workflow rules, I would certainly get in here and take a look at it. Okay, so that's really all I wanted to go through from, at least from a what's new standpoint, going into the system, understanding exactly that some of these items need to be scoped, some of them need to be assigned to reports, some of them need to be assigned to the work centers at a user standpoint. So now we're going to go into that specifically. So let me close these down so we can speed everything up here. Okay, so the first thing, this is an example of something I wanted to show you. So obviously, if you go into the system, there's this Service Control Work Center. This Service Control Center shows you your user subscriptions, shows you your systems, but the user subscriptions are the ones that I wanted to show here. So this is your ability to go into the system and see your licensed users, see your assigned users, and see your overusage. So this is important, and it's going to be even more important going forward. And this is where you're going to get a little insider information, is that SAP has now hired a lot of new people on their sales team. So the beginning of this year, they brought on a new initiative, and that sales team is probably about 5 times larger than it used to be. And they've redistributed accounts to all of those salespeople for compliance reasons. So ByDesign historically is a system that allows you to use user licenses in excess of what you have, but you will be audited for compliance on a certain time frame or based on a threshold. So what happens is you go over compliance, and then a month later, 2 months later, SAP realizes it, they run their reports, and they realize that you're over compliance, and they contact you or us as a partner and say, hey, they're over on licenses, they need to true up. So this is something that we've been pushing back on all the clients as something that's important to watch out for, because SAP does have the ability to go back and backbill you, and we've seen it happen. So it's something that's important for you as a client, or as a prospective person to ByDesign, to understand how the licensing model works. So you can't overuse, meaning that you're not restricted to add new users to the system, but you will be audited on that. And while they don't typically backbill, they have in the past. So this is something that you want to make sure that you're keeping up with. And the way that we would do that is I'm going to walk through that here. So this is your user count. In this instance, we're seeing that there is no overusage, but if there were, I'm going to show you exactly where we go in the system to see that information. So let me close this down. And we'll go into our demo system here. And what we're going to do is we're going to go into Application and User Management. And we're going to go to Business Users. Well, actually, we'll start at Business Roles. So for any organization, some vary from others in the sense that business roles are not always 100% applicable to them. But that said, I would always recommend that business roles are being used, regardless of how many you have. And the reason I say that is because it is the easiest way for you to track license types. If you do user access by user, which you can, it becomes increasingly more difficult to manage the license level of each user. And not only that, but roles are great for being able to apply to multiple people on a larger scale organization. It's easier to manage the different types of job types that you have with these different roles. In this instance, we only have one here in the system, and it's called Administrator, but we'll pop into this one really quickly. Okay, so once we get in here, let me just click View All, so that way we can look at the actual work centers that are assigned in here. If I click on the work center and view assignments, so what you're going to see is here is all of the work centers, and they're all collapsed into every work center. So what we're looking at here is a list of every work center that shows up on the left side here. So when I collapse this, these are all the work centers. So you're going to see all of these over here. Then the different views are beneath them. So this is where it becomes a little bit tricky, and I'm not going to lie to you, there's certain things about this that do need to be improved, and I'm going to talk about those. So in this instance, every work center view has the ability to change the user type. And what you're going to see is I have account management here, which is a very typical work center, and all the things that are associated under it, your accounts, your activities, your contacts, your partners, and it's going to show you what user type will be assigned to the user that has this access. So if I change this, I can change it at the work center level, and I can check that box there, and it will assign all of these work centers, all of these views. Or I can go in and I can select different views respectively. And what that does is it makes it very more, give way more granularity into what we can assign to users to keep them within a certain user license type. And as we go through these, you're going to see all the different types. So if I go down into the SCM work centers, which are the most expensive ones, you'll see here that these work centers have different views in them. So there's certain options in here that allow you to manipulate your user licenses, to a lower state based on what functionality is required by that person. So you can see that every work center can have different user license levels. In this instance, SCM Enterprise User is the most expensive user in ByDesign. Standard Enterprise User is a little bit less than that. So that's basically saying, okay, well, we can have someone with a standard license go in and run inbound delivery notification runs. They can't do all of these other things independently, but we can have someone come in and run the runs with just a standard license. So this stuff becomes very important when you start trying to maneuver and move your licenses around to make more sense and save your organization money from a licensing standpoint. And you see that in all of these different work centers. So like, for example, the SCM ones have some that have standard in them, and then once you get into things like CRM, you're going to see these are CRM sales team users, but there's other stuff like new business, I think. Let me find a good one in here really quickly that shows you the breakdown. Let's see if there's... Here's a good one. So resource management. So as a project manager in the system, you would need to be a standard enterprise user to come in and change resource profiles. But if I just wanted someone to be able to go in and look up a person, they could have a lower licensed user in a project management self-service user, which is significantly cheaper. So that's how they break this functionality down, as managers to people who just need to view the information, and they make this more granular with like every release. They change this up so that you can manipulate your users to be lower user licenses based on the functionality that they require. So what's key to this too is you can see here that they've added this tab in here in the last couple of releases that say license type. So this tells me that whatever I have assigned to this role only makes this user, brings this user up to an SCM enterprise user. This user has like every access in the system. But if I wanted to change this down to a much lower license, I would go in, manipulate the role, and it would tell me what user license it does, what user license it has. And then also one thing I didn't show was in the Service Control Center. When you're looking at user subscriptions, you do have the ability, in this system I don't have it available, but you can click into each user thing and see who is assigned to it. It's almost the same as this screen. If we go into business roles, and I click on administrator, I view all, there is this assigned business user. So this same exact functionality resides in the service center. I just can't show it to you in this demo system because I actually don't have licensed users in this system, but it would look just like this. It's going to show me all of the users that are associated with it, with this actual role, and it would be the same for the user license in the Service Control Center. It would tell you what users are in there. Okay, and then like I was mentioning before, the SAP sales team has now been divided up so that every account is now assigned, and it's almost all new. So all of the account executives from SAP for ByDesign now own accounts that they didn't necessarily own before because there's many more of them. What that means is that they're all held responsible for the overusage of their accounts. So while SAP used to have maybe one or two people in the US who are watching the overusage, now it's more, there's one account executive that manages a certain amount of accounts and they're responsible for it, and it's at a much lower level. So what ends up happening is it's going to be much more scrutinized now, and you're going to be contacted by your partner or SAP a lot quicker when you have overusage. That's kind of why we put this webinar together, so you would understand the best practices of getting into your system, knowing how to realize how to manage your roles and your user access to get people to the actual user license that they should be at, and make sure that you're keeping it on a steady pace, keeping it within usage. You also have the ability now to request new user licenses on your own. So that can be done directly through SAP in the Service Control Center. So if we go down there and I take a look at it, and you look at user subscriptions, you can see that there's this button right here for additional user licenses. You click that open, it's going to open up a form, and it's an automatic, it sends you right to their licensing team. You can copy whoever you want on it, put a subject, and then you basically just put your request in here saying, hey, we need 10 more standard users, and then they'll get back to you and your partner with that request. They'll give you a quote. Okay, so that kind of covers the user licenses component of it. There's one more thing that I will show you just from a reporting standpoint. This isn't extremely powerful, and they're going to make this better. I've talked to their development team about this, but they're going to add more reports for this. But if we look up, let's say, users here. Another good one is access. You'll see things like all current access rights, all current users, access rights changelog. This information is either data sources that are built around your users that will allow you to see these very specific things. The names of these are very telling because that's really the only information that it gives you. The one thing that I don't like about these reports that I want them to change is that you can't see in any of these reports what actual license a user has assigned to them. You can't see what actual license level that they are in these reports, which is inconvenient because there is nowhere to export that from the system. So you're left with looking at your business roles or business users to determine what your users are. Or if you go into the Service Control Center, one trick that I've always done is if you go into the Service Control Center and you go into your user subscriptions, when you look at these user subscriptions, you have the ability to view who is in that bucket, for whatever license, and you can export those. But what that ultimately means is you have to export every user license. So if you have 5 different user types, you can export all of them and drop them into an Excel, and that's how I've typically done it in the past. I've asked like 100 times for them to give me a report that just has that information, but there is a means to do it, and that's typically how I do it. Okay, so we're approaching about 10 minutes left here, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap up here. I want to hand over to the team here to see if we have any questions that need to be answered.
Yep, we got one here, Ken. In the HANA update, I cannot find a way to differentiate a test system visually from a productive system. Have you any idea how to mark those visually like we could in the Silverlight system?
Yes. Well, so yes, let me answer that question for you. This is what I do. I'm in the system right now. If I go up to, let's see here. Oh, you're talking about in the HTML5 interface. So let's go up here and see. I think what you're referring to is the company settings. Putting on a starting image or a theme. I think I have some. Let me do something here real quickly. I'm going to check really quickly if we have. I know what you're saying. So what you're saying is in the past, we could go in and add in a company-specific logo on the top to designate it as a test system. In the HTML5 interface, we're not sure if that can happen. I have some sensitive information in this demo system, so I can't do it right now on the screen. Let me take that one offline, and we'll just take who that is, and we'll get back to them.
Yep, absolutely. We'll mark that down. That would be all the questions for right now. Thank you for joining us today. If you have any other questions, we will be following up with all the attendees, so feel free to ask at that time. We truly appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join us, and we hope to see you at all our future events. Have a great day.
Thanks, guys.